It is my honor today to welcome Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Gabrijel Eskobar and the EU Special Representative for the Kosovo and Serbia dialogue, Miroslav Lajčak. Thank you for being here today to the Atlantic Councils. Mr. Eskobar and Mr. Lajčak, it's really a pleasure to host you both again at the Atlantic Council as part of our Balkans Forward initiative. Tensions are once again mounting between Serbia and Kosovo following contested municipal elections boycotted by the Kosovo-Serbian community in 4 municipalities in northern Kosovo. We saw clashes between Serbian protesters and KFOR as Pristina moved to implement the results of those elections and enter municipal buildings. Last week, 3 Kosovar police officers were detained by Serbia, and in response, the government of Pristina banned trade with Belgrade, as well as all vehicles with Serbian license plates. Despite US and EU official efforts, Serbian prosecutors began legal proceedings against the officers on Friday. The current crisis threatens recent progress to normalize relations made through the EU-facilitated Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. French President Macron and German Chancellor Scholz have urged new elections to halt the crisis, and EU leaders have invited Kosovar Prime Minister Albin Kurti and Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić to Brussels for crisis management talks. With our Balkans Forward initiative at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, we are working not only to address the political challenges of the region, but also to highlight the potential of the Western Balkans to support these countries' Euro-Atlantic aspirations and keep the United States and Europe actively engaged in the region. Today's event is no different, as we look forward to hearing from Mr. Eskobar and Mr. Lajčak about the US and EU perspective on the recent escalation and how the US and EU are working together to bring the parties back to the negotiating table. For those of you joining us online, submit your questions on askac.org or join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag #BalkansForward. Mr. Lajčak and Mr. Eskobar, to start us off, what is your assessment on the current situation on the ground? Can you explain to our audience why are we in this crisis management mode yet again, Mr. Lajčak?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us, and the fact that we are here together with Gabrijel shows how closely we work together, European Union and United States, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm here in Washington, D.C. to have a series of meetings with my U.S. partners because I really believe that the moment is very important and also critical in a sense, and we need to discuss our next steps. The situation is very difficult. I am very worried. I am not hiding it. Since 26th of May, there are people out in the streets. There is Kosovo police, there is KFOR, and we have already seen several incidents, and I consider as the first priority to de-escalate, to get the people off the streets and to return to the dialogue. And of course, as part of the normalization of the process is to have new elections with the participation of Kosovo Serbs without any preconditions. If we do not manage to de-escalate, then we are waiting for casualties, and I don't think we can afford that.
Mr. Eskobar, are you as well worried?
I'm very worried. This has the potential to become a regional conflict, a regional confrontation, which is why we are very, very much supportive of European efforts. Now, it has to be a European effort. The countries are in Europe. Their highest aspiration is to be part of Europe. And as they normalize their relationship, they're also harmonizing their systems with Europe. And also, as Kosovo's greatest supporter, we would like to see them as part of NATO, as part of the European Union. And so what we want is we want a process that satisfies the concerns of the 5 non-recognizers, and that has to be a European process. But that doesn't mean that we're a passive participant. We are actively encouraging the sides to come to the table, to focus on the dialogue, and to work very hard on reaching the aspirations that we had coming out of Ohrid.
Before we talk about the dialogue and the invitation to go to Brussels, so far neither of the leaders have committed or agreed to go to the meeting. But what is your assessment, Mr. Eskobar, on the 3 detained police officers of Kosovo? During the weekend, State Department issued a call asking President Vučić and Serbian government to immediately and unconditionally release them. Is there a deadline for their release?
Well, we'd like to see it immediately. I mean, our position is that either whether they were kidnapped or whether they found themselves through a mistake on Serbian territory, They had no intention to be on Serbian territory, and therefore they should be returned to their families immediately.
Mr. Lajčak, on the three police, the same position?
I share the same position.
And meanwhile, how do you respond to Prime Minister Kurti's concern about fascist militia being present in the north of Kosovo and attacking journalists and KFOR troops? What is your evaluation of that concern in the north?
Well, there is no doubt that on the 29th of May, when we saw the scenes from Zvečan, there were radical elements. There were people who came with a purpose to hurt, maybe even to kill. They were armed, they had hand grenades, and their purpose was to create violence. And there is no justification, and there should be no pardon for these people. And these people must face justice. That's very clear. But we should also not apply the principle of collective guilt on all the Serbs who live. We cannot say that there are 45,000 criminals living in the north. So we really need to identify those who committed the crimes, and they need to be prosecuted for that. And at the same time, of course, we need to work with the Serbs who want to have a normal life, and we have to help them to get there.
On the issue of the fascist militia? And well, the fact that the U.S. Was mostly condemning the act by the Kosovo government to send there the newly elected mayor rather than condemning the presence of them.
Well, I want to clarify that. So first of all, we did see the need for the elections. We did recognize the results of the elections despite the low turnout. We did recognize the legitimacy of the mayors once they were inaugurated. What we had encouraged the government of Kosovo to do is not to forcefully take those buildings. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I've been with the federal government since I was 19, and I've seen the federal government abandon buildings for hurricanes and floods and fires and COVID and even demonstrations, and no one ever questioned the legitimacy of the U.S. government. And we were not going to question the legitimacy of the mayors if they would have worked from alternate sites. We had just encouraged people not to raise tensions. Now, we also said that anyone who attacked KFOR or Kosovo police should face consequences. But by the same token, the commander of KFOR told us that 90% of the people who appeared were peaceful protesters, and you cannot apply the term fascist mob to all of the residents of the north. That is really not helpful in creating an atmosphere of reconciliation.
Mr. Eskobar, yeah.
Also added, there were not only KFOR soldiers and Kosovo police who was attacked, but also journalists yeah. and regular citizens. And of course, our assessment of these extremists applies to all of them. This is not acceptable.
Is there a deadline for new elections?
There is no deadline.
Involving Kosovo Serbs?
There is no deadline because it all depends on the political will. We really believe that we need to call for the elections as soon as possible. Of course, there are constitutional procedures that need to be respected. It's either for the mayors to resign or to be dismissed through the local referenda. And this needs to be agreed. Mm-hmm. Of course, nobody wants to promote a solution that would be outside of the legal framework of Kosovo. But right now, we have not seen the political will to proceed with the early elections.
And this is where I want to continue our conversation. We have this three-point plan presented by the European Union. How do we shift the dynamic now and get toward the de-escalation? While we have the two leaders that have not committed to meet again in Brussels, we had over weekend President Vučić saying that there is no point to talking. It's meaningless to talk to Prime Minister Kurti anymore, and he also added that he will decide whether to technically attend the meeting. Prime Minister Kurti said that he will first assess the situation with the three Kosovo detained police before deciding on the meeting.
Look, there has not been a case that the leaders would refuse the invitation to Brussels. So therefore, I'm not overly worried about the rhetoric. They will come. I mean, we are working on a day, but to say no to the invitation from the European Union would really be a very serious and very negative act. So therefore, the meeting will take place. What is extremely, extremely important is de-escalation, because you cannot have a normalization process as long as you have hundreds, if not thousands, people out in the streets. So I think everybody understands that as a step number one, we really need to allow people to go back with their lives, and the police and the KFOR to be withdrawn. And then we need to agree on the date of the elections. Mm-hmm. in accordance, as I said, with the Constitution of Kosovo and the legal framework, and return to the dialogue. Because we either have a dialogue and we either have agreed solutions, or then we have confrontation and we have unilateral actions from both sides. And in that case, we are heading towards serious escalations and violence.
What is U.S. doing to support EU in this attempt to get the parties, the leaders, together on the table?
Well, look, we've encouraged both leaders to accept the European plan unconditionally, not present their own plan, but to accept the plan. There is no other option except through de-escalation and return to dialogue. And I do have to say that the transatlantic community is very united on this. So, you know, the idea that one of the two leaders is going to place conditions on a plan that's been carefully developed by the European Union in coordination with the United States, I think is reckless.
What if Prime Minister Kurti does not change position?
I think where there is a will, there is always a way. And I don't think escalation or the risk of violence, further violence, or even people being killed is in Prime Minister Kurti's interest. I do believe he's a Democrat, and he believes in the rule of law, and I believe in a dialogue, and I believe in the way forward which is agreed by the parties involved.
And what if President Vučić does not change position?
Let's not speculate about what if. As I said, they never said no, and I don't think they will say no. So this is a positioning, but we will have them in Brussels, I hope very soon.
What can you expect from this meeting that can be different from the other times, since so far they haven't worked? What will be different? What's your expectation?
This will be
What's the point sitting with them again?
This will be a crisis management meeting. We had the normalization meetings, and of course the most important and remarkable were the ones on 27th of February in Brussels and 18th of March in Ohrid. We had meetings where we had crisis management elements, but also normalization elements, like August last year in Brussels. This time it will be solely focused on crisis management, and I expect both leaders to come committed to find a solution, find a way out.
Mm-hmm. EU Special Envoy Lajčak, could the Ohrid agreement have been stronger?
Yes, of course, but it's the two parties.
And make the parties...
Yes, but we are not forcing using, buttons or weapons. They are not negotiating at a gunpoint. Yes, I'm not hiding. I said it publicly that initially we proposed a more ambitious document for Ohrid, 3 pages, 18 points, very detailed, but the leaders were unable to agree. They agreed on 12 out of 18 points, but it was impossible for them to bridge the remaining 6 points, and therefore we presented the second document, which was finally adopted, which has all the principles but does not have the timelines and the sequencing. But as I said, it's in the end, what is agreed between the two parties in the dialogue, Kosovo and Serbia.
Should there be any other mechanism to make the parties implement the agreements that they...
Well, look, I would like to see
part of it, yeah.
A little bit more strategic vision from both parties. From our perspective, from the perspective of the U.S. government, the defining characteristic of the Western Balkans is tremendous opportunity. And I do believe that the next generation of people in the Balkans really do want to capitalize on that opportunity. But we can't do that while we're in a permanent state of crisis. And I do believe that there are people in the region who do survive politically off of permanent crisis. So I'm hoping that the parties and the leaders will recognize that de-escalation and the dialogue is the only way forward for the region to be able to capitalize on the opportunities that are presented.
Mm-hmm. There are opportunities, and also there have been mentioned sanctions or consequences, as Washington is saying, if the situation does not de-escalate and the parties do not go back to the negotiating table. What will this cost be, Mr. Lajčak, for Kosovo and for Serbia?
Look, for a country or for a politician, it's important to be seen being on the right side of history, to be on the right team. But that's not enough. You also have to play the ball. to be on the right team and not play the ball is not enough. I was foreign minister for almost 10 years, and I know that when my friends from the United States or from the European Union ask us to do something, we listen, and we did. So you cannot tell the European Union and the United States and NATO that you are all wrong and I'm right. So this is very important. So therefore, the Euro-Atlantic community could not have been more clear what is expected. And obviously, if these requests were ignored, then the next step was, of course, to adopt measures just to show that there is also leverage. And this is not the first choice, this is not the second choice, but and the European Union is willing, and it was made very clear, that it is willing to go to the positive agenda as soon as the call for meeting these 3 points will be respected. And as I said, the point number 2 is the escalation.
Consequences? Can you tell us a little bit more what they may be?
Well, look, the consequence is very clear. We're offering partnership, and we're offering coordination on major foreign policy priorities. So if we can't get basic coordination and basic communication, then we can't move forward on the things that Ohrid promised, which is for both countries, Euro-Atlantic integration. So without that, I mean, the consequence is we can't move on that. So that's not necessarily an imposed consequence, but it is a choice that the 2 parties are making. So we were prepared to move very, very quickly to implement the promise of Ohrid, to bring Kosovo closer to Europe and NATO, to bring more investment to the region, including in Serbia. But we can't move there if we don't have the cooperation and we don't have a common vision. And right now, I'm afraid we don't.
I have this opportunity that few journalists or other outlets have, media outlets, to have you both here. And I want to address some concerns, critics about the handling of the situation with Kosovo and Serbia. How do you say, in response to critics that accuse the US or even the EU to be too soft and appeasing Serbia and to be too tough and hard on Prime Minister Kurti?
Well, I'll start with that. I mean, everything that we've done in the last 90 days, in fact, the last 15 years, has been in favor of Kosovo. Serbia didn't want us to recognize their independence, we did. Serbia didn't want a global recognition campaign, but we did. Even in the last 90 days, Serbia wanted us to put pressure on Kosovo to abandon the idea of elections. We didn't. Serbia wanted us to say that the elections would be illegitimate because of the low turnout. We didn't. Serbia wanted us to say that the mayors were illegitimate. We didn't. We recognized their legitimacy. So I challenge anyone to tell me where we have been hard on Kosovo and soft on Serbia. We had pushed Serbia to move on the ID cards, on the barricades, even on Council of Europe. And all of that went against Serbia, almost unilaterally. So what we're asking for from Kosovo is closer coordination and an acknowledgement of their internationally binding obligations. I don't think that's being hard on Kosovo, quite the opposite.
Mr. Lajčak?
We are not in this process to punish one party and appease or please the other party. We are in this process to help them normalize their relations, because without normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, there will be no normal atmosphere of cooperation in the Balkans. And I can tell you that the region is very worried. I was in Prespa last week and I spoke with a number of regional leaders, and they are really, really worried because this current confrontation is really putting the entire region in a very negative light, and many investors are asking whether this is a safe region to come with their investments. That's point number 1. Point number 2, European Union was very clear. I mean, European leaders are following this process very closely. There are several statements adopted at the level of European Council, which is the highest European body. We had the EU27 statement requesting to implement these 3 points. EU27 means that a statement which is co-drafted by all EU27 member states. And you also had President Macron and Chancellor Scholz personally investing in their time and their energy during the meeting in Chisinau. And if the response is no, then obviously the member states, without being very happy about it, need to show that there is a leverage also on the side of the European Union. And as I said, this is not the first choice, and it's absolutely not about taking sides. I mean, right now the first move should come from Kosovo. That means to to tell the mayors that they should operate from alternative offices, then the next step should come from Serbia. And the European Union has also said of negative measures with regard to Serbia. If Serbia does not play the ball, the reaction will be exactly the same.
I'll continue with that, Mr. Eskobar, because there are also even some Western critics that believe that Washington is supporting Vučić even in the days that are ongoing protests towards his authoritarian regime, as they accuse him, because apparently U.S. wants Serbia closer to the West and weaken the role of Russia in Serbia. And also there is another critic that Serbia is being granted leeway on Kosovo because it is cooperating with the West on Ukraine. Are these fair perceptions?
I would say no, absolutely not. Look, we do have concerns about Serbia and its relationship with Russia. But as we work with Serbia to address those concerns, we're not going to sacrifice regional stability. So we have made sure that Serbia continues to insist on the territorial integrity of BiH. I've said repeatedly that the Democratic Front in Montenegro is not a partner, despite the fact that Serbia does see them as a partner. And in Kosovo, we have consistently underlined our support for Kosovo's independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. So I don't see where people are believing that somehow we are supporting Vučić in all of this.
I don't know if you want to say something there, but I have another question that is related to this, and then I want to move to ASM and other issues. And you said regional security concerns for the situation in the north. How much truth is in the claim that Serbia was close to recognition of Kosovo, and this escalation blew up everything, Mr. Eskobar?
Recognition? I am not aware of that, but I can say that we did have an agreement in Ohrid, a legally binding agreement, where the two sides committed to normalization in a peaceful, predictable, and constructive relationship.
Do you want to say something on that?
Yes, first of all, the
recognition from Serbia?
Agreement on Ohrid is legally binding, and it was made legally binding in accordance with the Vienna Convention of the Law of the Treaties through the statement of the High Representative. So there should be no dilemma about it. We started the implementation. We established the Joint Monitoring Committee. We adopted the Declaration on Missing Persons. And we invited the management team to do the presentation of their draft of the statute. So the first 3 concrete steps were done. I've invited both parties to come to Brussels on the 5th and 6th of this month to commence our work on drafting the statute of the association. But instead, on the 5th and 6th, together with Gabrijel, we had to go to Pristina and Belgrade to deal with the crisis. So, as I already said, we either have confrontation or we have normalization. And there are so many concrete elements in the Ohrid agreement. We need to get back to this, and we need to focus, and we need to start implementing one after another. Our philosophy is both parties need to do something in order to get something, because we know that the trust between them is practically zero. So therefore, we do not force one party to do everything and then the other party to do their part, but to proceed step by both parties.
Talking about what parties do, there is a declaration that I don't know if you are aware because it was in the last hours, but President Vučić has stated that during the Vidovdan next week, the historic day for Serbs, they will, I'm quoting, peacefully take steps on the way to their freedom, no longer inform anyone except in accordance with Resolution 1244. Many are considering this statement as a declaration of a unilateral ASM for the Serbs in the north. What's your comment?
Well, I, as a facilitator of the dialogue, I am, of course, would like to discourage very strongly both parties to do anything unilaterally, because we have seen that unilateral moves produce more tensions, more confrontations, and the violence. We have a platform, which is the dialogue, and we have a platform, which is the agreement. So if there was no agreement, then the parties could be tempted to do something on their own. But right now, we have a clear path towards normalization. So it's the only logical way is to get back to this and to continue the implementation. And no unilateral moves with the potential to destabilize the situation between the two of them even further.
Mr. Eskobar?
We're fully aligned on that. I really don't see the value of unilateral moves.
Serbian demands for the ASM are quite expensive, according to some who believe that the draft presented, especially by Kosovo Prime Minister, who rejected the draft presented by the management team in Brussels, considering as a resemblance of Republic, Srpska Republic. Do you see any space for compromise somewhere in the middle for the model of the Association of Serbia?
No, that's not how we think. We are not trying to find ourselves somewhere in the middle. We want to, first of all, association or community of Serb majority municipalities is an international legal obligation for Kosovo. As you know, it was agreed in 2013. It's not invented by Gabrijel Eskobar and Miroslav Lajčak. We also believe that for the normalization of the relations, there need to be a formula that will allow the Serbs to have the protection of their language, culture, but at the same time, of course, clearly within Kosovo legal framework as citizens of Kosovo. That's very clear. And now, I believe in Europe, in European Union. I believe in European models. I believe in best European examples. So what we want to do is to jointly draft a statute that will be based on the best functioning European models. We have made analysis of 16 existing European models. I don't see the reason to go beyond, and I just see no justification to go beyond what works in Europe. It does not weaken any of the European countries. Let's get inspiration from what works, and let's make sure that we create something which is not a monster, but it's something that will really help Kosovo and Serbia normalize the relations.
Anything to say on the space between for negotiations for the ASM model?
Look, I think the Secretary's Counselor, Derek Chalet, and I are very clear in our op-ed that it should be something that's within the Kosovo's legal structure, constitutional authority, and does not create problems for functionality. But it should allow municipalities with the majorities, with Serb majorities, to provide services in Serbian language to people who speak that language.
Was Edi Rama's proposal constructive for the ASM, Mr. Escobar?
I think it was.
A good point
I think it was. I mean, I think it was a serious proposal. And I also think that it reflects the growing level of regional anxiety that this important part of the agreement will never be done. I would urge people to read it.
Yes, it is a very serious proposal, which I believe accommodates the concerns and wishes of both parties.
So far, both parties have rejected it in their comments.
I really hope that we will have this discussion about what is in the statute, what is not, rather than dealing with the people in the streets and with the violence and the clashes.
After the recent security crisis in the north that we're still talking about it, and you both shared concerns about the situation, and actually Mr. Escobar mentioned that this is becoming a security regional issue. Is there a need for a new mandate or concerns for KFOR presence in Kosovo? Mr. Escobar first.
Well, look, I don't want to speak on behalf of NATO. I do want to say that KFOR enjoys our full support right now.
As you know, KFOR was reinforced in response to the situation on the ground, but I don't see a stronger presence of KFOR or ULEX as the way forward. I mean, we need more normalcy, we need more constitutional order, we need more dialogue. That's really important. Reinforcing KFOR means going backwards, and that's not what we want.
What's the best forward now? For the dialogue, we have the 3 points that we discussed, but do you both, Mr. Escobar and Mr. Lajčak, do you have the means, the strategic patience, and the determination to see this through?
I don't think we have time to be strategically patient. I said several times that we also need to take the political calendar into account, and the calendar is such that we have European elections and we have US presidential elections next year, and Kosovo will not be in the center of attention after the new year. So I really believe that we need to finalize bulk of our work by the end of this year. So we might be in a completely new game after all these elections and the new setup. So I don't think we have the luxury of strategic patience. I really believe that we need to return to the negotiating table without delay as soon as possible.
Well, I agree. And look, I believe that we can get to the full implementation of Ohrid very quickly. Mm-hmm. Both sides have obligations, and we think those obligations are immediately implementable. Serbia has to start thinking about how they would implement their side, which is recognition of Kosovo's flag, national symbols, government documents, and everything else that comes with it, and including recognizing Kosovo's need to be integrated into European and transatlantic structures. And Kosovo has to begin immediately and urgently talks on the formation of the association.
Talking about association, do the parties want to establish it? Does Prime Minister Kurti wants to implement it?
Well, he affirmed that international obligation at Ohrid. And that's what's most important.
Mr. Lajčak?
Yes, I can only confirm that. And of course, I know it's a very sensitive issue, but we are here to make sure that we are not creating a monster, but we are creating something that will bring more transparency, more clarity, and it will be a win-win model, and we can do that.
Special Envoy Miroslav Lajčak, thank you very much for being here at Atlantic Council today. Das Escobar, thank you very much also for sharing your perspective and concerns on the situation in the north of Kosovo and the potential dialogue that should be resuming as soon as possible between the parties. Thank you to our in-person audience as well. Thank you for watching us.